Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. I want to thank you for being here with me today. Today we're going to be discussing 5 educational poker hands from top pros. So let's go ahead and get right to it. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in and I will certainly address them. I do see some people saying hello already, so good to see people here. Good to know that you can hear me. So let's get to it. First things first, who am I? For those who do not know me, I'm Jonathan Little. I'm a professional poker player. I've cashed for over $6.8 million in live poker tournaments. I'm the author of 14 best-selling books. I am the commentator on many poker shows, and I am the head coach at pokercoaching.com. So that is me. I have lots of experience playing poker and final tables, and that is what we are going to be discussing today. So in preparation for one of my students, David Einhorn, for the $1 Million Buy-In one-drop event, I reviewed many high roller tables looking to find ways to exploit the best players in the world and also how to not get exploited by them, right? Because clearly if you're playing against the absolute best players in the world, you better know what you're doing. And well, it turns out all the best players in the world play great. And that's a bit of a problem. So whenever they are playing great, what do? Do you try to maximally exploit them or anything like that? Well, you can't really exploit people who are playing great. So you need to learn to play fundamentally sound yourself. And if you do happen to pick up something, or if you find spots where some players get out of line, then maybe you can do a little something here and there. But I was essentially preparing David for the final table. And that's what we were going for. All right, so let's take a look at 5 educational hands. And these are 5 hands that demonstrate tips that you definitely want to keep in mind when you are playing the final table. And the first one is to keep the pot manageable. And this is the case in poker tournaments in general because you really do not want to lose a lot of chips unnecessarily. And very often this will result in using a strategy of only putting in a lot of chips with an extremely polarized range, which means either the absolute best hands or some bluffs. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying only put money in with the absolute nuts, right? You do need to be in there bluffing sometimes. And very often the best hands to be bluffing with are draws that cannot win at showdown that have some equity. If you all are members of pokercoaching.com, you know that we discuss this thoroughly in every single monthly homework challenge about how you want to be betting with your best made hands and your draws. And that's exactly what the best players in the world are doing. If you're not a member of pokercoaching.com, you can go there and get a completely free trial. So check it out. There's no reason not to. So understand that you should be bluffing sometimes, but a lot of your equity, or realize that you will have equity with your marginal hands, and you want to realize that equity, which often leads to you playing a lot of small and medium pots. And that is usually going to be the right way to go about playing final tables, because if you lose your stack, which is usually not all that deep, you have just lost a ton of equity. So let's take a look at a hand. I'm not sure if this video is going to work particularly well or not, but we will see. So here's me reviewing this hand. You can't hear me right now. But in this scenario, take a look, right? We have a raise from Hello Toddy, one of the best players in the world, I think number 5 in the world at the moment, who min raises, and then European, another very, very strong player, calls in the small blind. So let's just go back. Notice that European could re-raise to something like 55K, but if he gets shoved on, he's going to be in a pretty rough spot where, you know, he essentially has to put in half of his stack with ace-queen, which is probably okay, right? But it's kind of rough because notice Hello Toddy here. If Hello Toddy jams, Hello Toddy is jamming when there are multiple people with roughly his same stack, right? Which will essentially mean that Hello Toddy to jam will need a very, very good hand. So this is a spot where re-raising certainly has merit, but you don't really want to get it all in for a 33 big blind stack, or whatever it is Hello Toddy has. Also, this is a spot where, say you know Hello Toddy opens really wide on the button, but will fold to a re-raise a lot of the time. Well, you'd rather just call and keep Hello Toddy in, and then just try to not fold your ace-queen by the river. So let's take a look at what happened. European called, flop comes Jack 5-2. Now this is a scenario where if we were playing deeper stacks, perhaps Hello Toddy just bets with his whole range. But now notice Hello Toddy has ace high, which has some equity, and also a gut shot. So Hello Toddy really doesn't want to bet here and get shoved, because then he'll have to fold a hand that has plenty of equity, which you never really want to do. So this is a spot where I think checking behind makes sense. You could also bet. The problem, though, is what is European's calling range from the small blind? If you think about it, it should be mostly just big cards that aren't quite good enough to re-raise and get it in. And a lot of those actually have a jack, like ace jack, king jack, queen jack, jack 10, maybe jack 9 suited, maybe even like jack 8 suited if he's being really splashy. So notice it just goes check, check, right? Because even though the board is relatively uncoordinated, the jack lines up pretty well. So check, check on the flop. European, again, very clear marginal made hand. There's no reason to put money in the pot, right? Just going to go check. And again, Hello Toddy probably doesn't have much of a reason to bet. Check, check again. And now, should Hello Toddy bluff the river? It's an interesting spot because whenever European checks down, he probably has a lot of ace high, which Hello Toddy loses to, king high, which Hello Toddy beats, and then maybe some under pairs that probably won't fold to one bet. So I mean, certainly there is merit to betting here if you think you can get ace high to fold, but ace high may not even fold. And also, like, would Hello Toddy want to bet with pocket eights at this point? Or a hand like, well, if he had 9, he would bet for sure. I'm trying to think, are there better bluffs here? And I think the answer is clearly yes. Like, say you just had king high and decided to check, check, flop, check, check, turn. You would probably consider bluffing that to try to get ace highs to fold. But I don't think it's necessary with this hand. So notice here. Really, the point of showing this hand, this is nothing spectacular, but a lot of people look at these scenarios and think that you're supposed to be running these gigantic bluffs or making like just multiple triple barrel bluffs at the final table, and that is not true. Here we see two players with, you know, reasonably strong hands, and they just check it down, right? They just kept the pot manageable. And Alex says, can you explain ICM for dummies? Well, ICM right here is a very clear overriding factor that neither of those players really wanted to play a big pot when there was another player sitting there with only 8 big blinds or 9 big blinds. Maybe it's 15 big blinds. Either way, not a lot of chips, right? So they just play a small pot because there's really no reason to try to play a big pot and risk going broke. All right, next, the button limp. This happened a lot. For the most part, limping on the button and to some extent the cutoff with a 20 to 40 big blind stack is a strong strategy with hands that flop well as a few traps. So notice that if you're playing something like 20 big blinds deep and you raise king 8 suited or jack 10 offsuit and face an all in, well, you have to fold. And you don't want to fold, right? Because king 8 suited is pretty good and jack 10 offsuit is pretty good. So is there an alternative, right? In this scenario, if you limp and face a raise to 5 big blinds or so, you can then call and see a flop with all of these hands, right? So in this scenario, if you expect to get jammed on when you raise, you're going to be much better off limping instead. Some people think that you should never limp. They're adamantly against limping. But you always want to ask, what is likely to happen? And when you are playing 20 to 40 big blinds deep, well, what's likely to happen is you're going to get shoved all in or face a big re-raise that makes it to where you can't really call very often. And that's not ideal. So how do you sidestep that? You make a different play. And it turns out limping is by far the best option, especially from the button, because when you limp the button, you know you're going to be in position throughout the hand, right? If you limp from the cutoff, sometimes the button will limp and now you're out of position, or the button will raise, even worse, and now you have to call a raise from out of position. So really, you don't want to be doing a whole lot of limping from the earlier positions and even the cutoff. Some of the best players were doing it every once in a while. They would also trap with aces. As long as people are not raising your limps too often, I think it's a perfectly viable strategy. But if they see you limping with king 8 suited from the hijack seat, they're just going to start attacking you pretty hard. So let's take a look at a hand. So in this scenario, Apestyles, very, very strong player. I've actually learned a lot from him. He limps in on the button, right? And notice in this scenario, if he raises to, let's say, 40 or 50K and gets re-raised or jammed, he's going to clearly have to fold. Or if he even just gets re-raised normal, say he makes it 40 and someone makes it 160, he's going to have to fold. and you really don't want to fold. So this is a pretty nice spot to limp with a hand that's going to flop decently well. Let's see what imluckbox does. You can either limp or raise here with the king, queen. I think either plays fine. But I think I typically like raising because king, queen's great. And notice there, Apestyles calls in position, right? That's what he was trying to do. He is limping in this scenario so that he can call a raise. You're not limping so that you can then fold to a raise. You're limping so that you realize equity. Realizing your equity is the name of the game. You want to be able to see the flop and ideally get to the river, because if you just find a way to get to the river, you're very often going to be winning a decent chunk of the time. So he calls the flop, gets a 10, which is lucky. Now, notice imluckbox has to play from out of position in a pretty marginal spot. I think you can either bet or check. I mean, if you bet, you're essentially saying you just have a very strong range. And he does bet, and I don't think you need to be betting particularly big in this spot. Apestyles is clearly going to call. I say clearly going to call because, again, notice that Apestyles certainly does not want to play for all of his money against a strong range. So this is a scenario where with top pair, marginal kicker, the way you keep imluckbox's range as wide as possible and full of bluffs is to just call. If you raise with top pair here and then get jammed on, it becomes a really, really miserable spot, right? Because then you have essentially a bluff catcher. Whereas now, whenever you raise and get jammed on, there are way fewer bluffs in your opponent's range than if you call the flop, because now your opponent's still in the pot with pretty much his whole range. Now he turns a 10, which is clearly the nuts. He's never folding at any point. And now the question, should imluckbox continue betting? I mean, he obviously wants to make ace highs fold. Could he potentially make under pairs fold? Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure this bluff is necessary. You probably have better bluffs, like any hand with a gut shot straight draw. Maybe even stuff like queen high instead of king high, because this king queen actually wins sometimes. So interesting scenario. Notice here, there's like no world Apestyles raises here, because if you raise, you force your opponent to only call with good hands, right? You'd much, much, much rather call. Some people are afraid of getting outdrawn in this spot, but that is not a good strategy. Because, yes, there are draws available, but it's pretty hard for your opponent to have exactly 9-8 or 8-6 or 2 clubs. And even if they do, they're still going to bluff the river when they miss. So now imluckbox has a very strong marginal made hand. I think I would check and then check call against the jam, because Apestyles could still have lots of bluffs or even marginal hands turn into a bluff on the river. So I don't think imluckbox needs to bet. So he does check, which I think is a very clear play. Because again, marginal made hand, right? You want to be checking the marginal made hands, because if you bet, what's going to call you, right? Well, if he bets here, what's going to call? Well, a 10, and you lose. So this is definitely a spot to check the king queen, and then Apestyles is going to shove. No other play besides all in, at least in my opinion. He's taking his time. We'll fast forward a bit. And then, like I said, Apestyles is going to shove, and I'm just sure imluckbox is going to call. Whenever you get this queen, you're not trying to fold. One thing worth mentioning is a lot of people will... Oh, snap call. I was say a lot of people will essentially try to talk themselves into making huge folds, but that is also not necessarily a great idea. You always want to ask, am I near the top of my range? And if you are against a good player, you really just don't want to fold the hands at the top of your range. If you're playing against very bad, straightforward players, well, then maybe you can start finding big folds if you know they essentially never bluff. But that's not what we're dealing with here. We're playing against strong opponents. Mark says, you never considered open limping late in a tournament being a reasonable move. Well, you always want to ask, what is the alternative, right? I mean, if your opponents are going to fold to a pre-flop raise way too often, just keep raising, right? But this is what you must do if your opponents adjust and they start jamming over your raises. I mean, I talk about this in my very first tournament book. If people raise and... Or I'm sorry, if someone raises, by far the best strategy with 20 big blinds or 25 big blinds against them is to just go all in, because almost no one calls often enough. And to be fair, it is hard to call often enough. And in a tournament, you just can't call off because you really don't want to play a big pot, right? So you need to find a better option. You could start raising bigger, which forces them to perhaps shove a little tighter. And it's because it gives you better odds and you're just risking more pre-flop. But again, that still makes you end up playing a big pot. And, well, the alternative is to limp and then play small pots. And you'd much rather play small pots, especially when you're going to be in position. Is the defense against this to raise to 9 big blinds instead of 3 big blinds? No, if someone limps and you make it 9 big blinds, now you're just basically going all in. You're risking a ton to win almost nothing. And also, if people realize that's what your adjustment's going to be, they'll just start trapping you, right? But the right adjustment is just to typically raise with a pretty strong value range, like imluckbox did, right? Just a strong linear range, because you're going to get called a lot, but that's okay because you just have 55 or 60% equity. Do we overcall limps with these hands too? No. Well, first off, again, we're assuming we're playing against good players in these exact scenarios where we'll actually talk a little bit about playing against bad players later. But against good players, like no one is going to limp from earlier position. But if someone did limp and you have Jack 10 offsuit on the button, it's probably just a fold. Tom says, what about value betting the river instead of all in? No, you definitely want to shove, because in that spot, imluckbox is either going to have a busted draw, which is obviously folding, a junky made hand, which is obviously folding, or like a strong made hand, like a 7 or better that's not going to fold. So you just want to go all in. Also, there were plenty of busted draws available. When there are lots of busted draws available, you want to be using a big bet size. When we limp, aren't we signaling a weak hand? No. And also, if they shove for 40 big blinds, think about how much they're risking, right? Also, you have to understand that when you limp, you're not doing it with only marginal stuff. Let me go back to the slide. Maybe I didn't say it. You want to limp with hands that flop decently well as a few traps. And when you limp with a few traps, even like 10% of your range being traps, if your opponents get well out of line and start trying to raise you, you will just demolish them. Because you're going to have the nuts some portion of the time, and they just can't do anything about it, and they're just risking a ton of money. So either, if they start raising huge or jamming on you, then you just get maximally paid with your aces and your kings and your queens and your ace-king. So you have to be balanced, and understand, I'm not saying only do this with marginal stuff. Ralph says, so we're limping about 45% of hands? No, 45% is way too wide. This is just the hands that flop well. You're still raising your best hands and some bluffs. I want to make it clear. You have two strategies here. I'm not saying limp with everything. I'm saying limp with the hands that flop well, plus a few nut hands. Raise your best hands and some junky hands with blockers, like ace X or whatever, and then fold the rest. You'll end up playing something like 40 or 50 or 60% of hands on the button, but it'll be a mixed strategy of raising sometimes and limping sometimes. Understand how ranges interact. So sometimes middle pair is marginal, and other times it's decently strong, right? As the opponent's range gets wider, and as they will raise less often as a bluff, especially due to ICM implications, you can value bet with a wider range because you can't really expect to get raised, because it would be a horrible, horrible mistake due to ICM implications to play a big pot, right? Also, when you are value betting with a marginal made hand, make sure your opponents can realistically call your bet. So let's take a look at a hand here about understanding how ranges interact. Here we have Aggro Santos, another very strong player, and Probirs. So we have, notice here, first things first, Aggro Santos is pretty aggressive raising. He's the big stack at this table. Notice Raid a lot, who is Talal, very strong player as well, has a shallow stack, right? So let's rewind a bit, take a look at the blinds. Raid a lot has only 8 big blinds, right? So Aggro Santos has a ton, and Aggro Santos should be opening way, way wider than normal. So that's what he's doing. Also, some of the best hands to raise as a bluff are the hands with a blocker, and Ace X definitely fits that category. Notice now, Probirs calling. You may think, why would he call in this spot? 7-6 is pretty bad. I do think it's a little bit loose, but facing a min raise from a player who should be playing quite loosely, you can call pretty wide. All right, so 8-6-4, great spot for Aggro Santos just to put some money in the pot. This is borderlining a marginal made hand, but very often when you have top pair with a top pair that's not particularly strong, meaning there are lots of bad cards on the turn for you, like right here, any overcard is pretty bad. Also, 7 and a 5 are pretty bad. Maybe even 6 and 4 are pretty bad. So there are a lot of bad cards. You'd rather go ahead and bet. If the board's instead ace 6-4, then maybe Aggro Santos would check some aces. But you're not going to be checking very many 8s in this spot. Notice also how he's betting on the large side. This is a scenario where you want to ask, how does this board interact with my opponent's range? And as the board interacts better and better with your opponent's range, meaning your opponent's going to connect with more pairs and whatnot that just aren't going to fold to any reasonable bet, you essentially get to bet larger with your betting range. And I actually don't think Aggro Santos is betting all that often on this board. It's probably going to be just strong top pairs and better. So if you're betting strong top pairs and better, clearly you're just value betting with those hands. And then you're betting with some bluffs like 10-9 or Ace-7 or Ace-5 or King-7 suited or King-5 suited if you're opening those, which Aggro Santos probably is. So I like betting big here with and again, a very strong polarized range. With 7-6, we have an easy call because you beat all the bluffs and you have equity against the good hands. So definitely an easy call. Do not raise. If you raise here, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to get your opponent to fold out their gut shots, and they're going to put all their money in when you're crushed. So do not raise. Very clear marginal made hand. And also, Probirs really doesn't want to go broke on this hand, which is actually a reason to consider folding it pre-flop because you really don't want to go broke before rate a lot. But I think it's still fine to defend. All right, queen on the turn. Who does this help? Well, it clearly doesn't help either player in this scenario, but it definitely does not help Probirs' range at all, right? Because think about this. Probir check called the flop, which means he probably has something that connects with this board. So unless he had queen 8, queen 6, or queen 4, he just doesn't have anything great here. So this ace 8's actually looking pretty decent. It's not the nuts, but it's certainly a strong hand, right? So should we value bet the turn? I think it's definitely fine. And the reason I think it's fine is because, again, how does this board interact with Probir's range? When he check calls flop, he almost certainly has an 8 or worse. So if he has an 8 or worse, well, it means we have the nuts, right? It is a pretty rough spot if Aggro Santos bets this turn and then gets jammed on. But again, you really should not be getting jammed on all that often, because if you get jammed on, it's essentially Probir saying, I have the nuts because I don't really care at all about going broke, because even with rate a lot sitting over here with no chips. So this is a scenario where you really should not fear getting raised by the medium stack, because it is an ICM disaster if you raise here without just the absolute nut hands. So he does bet, and he bets rather large, right? Again, because what are you trying to get called by? You're trying to get called by a 6, which is probably going to call. You're also going to get called by some 4s and also some 8s. And you may say, like, shouldn't these hands be afraid of a queen? Well, yes, but also realize a queen is a very solid bluffing card for Aggro Santos. I mean, I just told you if he had 10-9, he would want to keep betting, right? And if he had a hand like Queen Jack on the flop, maybe he bluffs it. Maybe even bluffs Queen 10 suited, King Queen, etc., right? So there actually are a decent amount of queens, but there are also a lot of bluffs, like all the various overcards and whatnot. So he does continue betting. Also, like I said, he could easily have the gut shots, right? And he could also have some backdoor flush draws that just turned more equity. So this is a great spot for Aggro Santos to be value betting. This is a spot where I think almost everyone checks the turn, but I think checking the turn is a pretty big error in this exact scenario. Just because you don't fear getting raised. If you know you're never going to get raised, it makes life very, very easy. All right, so Probirs does call, which I think is fine because he's beating all of the bluffs. On the river, Probirs checks again. No reason to turn this hand into a bluff, I don't think. And now, should Aggro Santos value bet again? And I would say definitely no. Because think about this, right? Probirs check call flop and check call turn. So he either has an 8, which, we beat, a 6, which will probably fold to a river bet, or a 4, which we now lose to. He could also randomly have some backdoor flush draws, backdoor straight draws, like Jack 10 of clubs, or a hand with a gut shot with clubs that now made the nuts. And if Probirs is good, he's going to be checking a lot of those to Aggro Santos, because Aggro Santos should be doing some bluffing on the river. So this is a spot where Aggro Santos now cannot bet. Does Aggro Santos bet the turn regardless of the card in this scenario? No, absolutely not. Like I was saying, a 7, 6, 5, or 4 are all particularly terrible. Also, a 10 and a 9 are not particularly great because Probirs could easily have those gut shot draws, but a queen or a king are very clearly blanks. A jack is kind of a blank as well, but a 10 or a 9 are not so blanks, not so blanky as well. So anyway, check on the river. I would be shocked if Aggro Santos bets. Oops, well, I rewound on me. Seems like an easy check behind to me. And he does check, check, and win the pot. All right, next. Apply immense pressure to the big stack. Actually, Pat wants to go back. What hands would Aggro Santos bet in that scenario? He'd be betting some busted draws and some nut hands, but probably not a whole lot of bets on the river. All right, apply immense pressure to the middle stacks. So the middle stacks are highly incentivized to not go broke before the short stacks. Someone was asking about ICM earlier. This is what we are talking about. So if you have a middle or big stack and a middle stack raises with a range wider than only the effective nut hands, you should be 3-betting relentlessly. Having a blocker in your hand is wise because it makes it more difficult for the raiser to continue because they have fewer premium hands in their range. So here we have a situation where Bone here has ace queen offsuit with a 50 big blind stack, opens it up at 36,000, 3 big blinds. 3 big blinds is a little bit big, but they are playing rather deep stacked. Probably wants to raise a little bit bigger to disincentivize Aggro Santos from flatting on the button with the humongous stack. And now Aggro Santos is going to re-raise. Bone is also one of the best players in the world, plays $1 million buy-in tournaments, etc., etc. And gets around to Aggro Santos, who re-raises to 120K. Now, why is he doing this? Well, Bone really does not want to go broke before, well, everyone else at the table, right? So the only bad thing that can really happen to him is to lose a big pot to Aggro Santos. So how can Aggro Santos make Bone risk losing a big pot? Well, the answer is by re-raising and putting him in a terrible scenario. So like right here, notice the hand that Aggro Santos chose. It has a blocker with the king, and it's suited in case he does get called. It's not a great hand, but it's very clearly a bluff. If he is bluffing this hand, he's almost certainly bluffing some king 3 suited, king 4 suited, king 5 suited, king 6 suited. Maybe he's only using suited hands. Maybe he's going to bluff with like queen 8 suited sometimes. Maybe ace 2, ace 3, ace 4, ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, ace 8, ace 9 suited. Maybe he's bluffing all those. He may flat with some of those too. I'm not sure of his exact strategy. But I'm pretty sure you want to be using the suited blockers as bluffs in this scenario when you're the giant stack attacking a middle stack. So now what does Bone do? You raise to 36K, and now you get re-raised. It's a pretty bad spot, right? If you call and make top pair, you could just be beat, which would be a disaster. And if you fold, well, that's also pretty rough too, because if you're folding this hand, it means you're just not really going to be opening a whole lot more. So it's a pretty rough spot for Bone to be in. And there's really not a great option. Because you just, again, you don't want to play a giant pot. You could also 4-bet, but if you 4-bet to 250K and then he jams you, well, you probably have to fold. So it's just a really rough spot to be in. Anyway, gets back around to Bone, and he folds. And again, one of the best players in the world, someone who I highly respect, and I'm going to presume whatever Bone does here is the definitive right play. It's worth mentioning, right? While I do play quite high-stakes tournaments, and I've played poker with many of these players, I definitely am not the absolute best player in the world, and people like this character, Bone, actually are in that category. So I'm going to presume whatever they are doing is accurate. Dean says, isn't this how leveling wars happen, knowing that the opponent's going to re-raise wide? I mean, look, I don't think there's a whole lot of leveling wars going on amongst the best players in the world. It's more of they are playing their range and they are playing their scenarios. When you used to play before Black Friday, everyone used to raise it 3 times. Now it's more common to see smaller raises. Well, I think you're going to see the number slowly trickling back up. The reason people raise small is because your opponents fold too often to a small bet, just making it immediately profitable. As you raise bigger and bigger, your opponents should fold more often, and that's typically what people actually do. They play pretty well. Is it fine to call with ace-queen here? I mean, I don't know. I'm gonna default to Bone. I probably would have called here. It would have been a rough spot, though, and you certainly want to avoid rough spots. It is definitely a good strategy to make early folds in hands because, like I said, right there, if you call, Bone has to check call almost every flop, whether he makes a pair or not. And even then, he could still just be beat, right? So it's a pretty dicey spot to be in. Is ICM a big part of this decision? Well, of course it is. Obviously, if Bone is playing a normal situation, he's never, ever folding here. But this is a scenario where you're certainly very... It's not a good spot to raise and then fold. However, Some people are saying, like, how can you raise and then fold this if you know that you have the aggressive guy on your left? Well, maybe his range is actually very tight here. And I did notice that Bone's range was quite snug, opening in a scenario where Aggro Santos could 3-bet. So maybe ace-queen or an ace-jack are actually near the bottom of his range, right? So if those hands are the bottom of his range, because he's just opening super nitty in this spot, then it's fine to fold. And you should be super nitty in this spot. As the second stack, with a very clear big stack and a bunch of shallow stacks, you should be super duper nitty. Is aggro 3-betting any 2 cards here? No. Aggro is going to 3-bet the blocker hands, like I discussed. So what is the strategy in this scenario for Bone? Yeah, just be a nit. That's right. You just have to be a nit. Should Bone consider shoving all in? I mean, you could. Seems really risk-heavy to me. It's one of those spots where, yes, you win the pot a lot of the time, but whenever you get called and you lose, it's just a disaster. Because you go from having loads of equity to, well, 8th place. It's a huge payout difference. Like right here, Bone is almost guaranteed to take something like 4th place or better just by hanging out, playing kind of tag. And there's a big difference between 8th and 4th, and certainly between 8th and 1st. All right, next. What does the term nitty mean? Nitty means very tight. You should play very tightly in that scenario. All right, next. Hand values change heads up. So the idea of conserving your stack becomes irrelevant when there are no more payout implications. Because think about it. Whenever you're playing heads up, both players are guaranteed 2nd place. So really, you're just playing for the difference between 1st and 2nd, right? So it's a heads up match where the difference is the difference between 1st and 2nd. So there are no payout implications anymore. There's no value in trying to ladder up because you can't just sit there and be patient and ladder up a spot or 2, right? You must beat the other player. So while top pair with no kicker is a marginal hand in most normal scenarios, heads up, especially on a draw heavy board, it becomes a really, really good hand. And also, just don't be afraid to get it all in when you have a sizable advantage. So many players they assume the standard hand rankings of, the premium made hand, marginal made hand, draws, and junk. Like at a 9-handed table, they line up the same way heads up, but that's not true at all. Heads up, stuff like even bottom pair is good to value bet on a street or 2, whereas normally it's much too weak. So let's just take a look at one hand. I actually reviewed a whole lot of hands in this preparation for David Einhorn, but let's just take a look at one. Here we have a raise from Luckbox. Easy defend with Queen 2. Flop comes Queen 6-4. This is a spot where Apestyles is very likely going to check, and then Luckbox is going to bet. Apestyles is taking his time. This is a spot where Luckbox definitely should be value betting. So definitely a scenario where that makes logical sense because there are lots of draws and whatnot. You really don't want to let's see the turn for free, and also you just have the best hand a lot. But now, should Apestyles raise this hand? And that's the interesting question, right? Where in this scenario, you have the best hand with top pair almost always. It's very, very important to realize that top pair, even with a marginal kicker, is very good. And on a board like this, there's a lot of value in protecting your equity. And if you do happen to have the worst hand, well, there actually aren't all that many combinations of hands that beat you. And sometimes you're going to be beat. So Apestyles takes his time and raises to 112K. Obviously, this is a fine spot to raise with better hands. I don't think most people raise with hands quite this weak, and really, I perhaps would not have done that before watching this, but I mean, it makes perfectly logical sense on this very draw-heavy board. And also notice there are loads of bluffs that Apestyles could also raise, right? Notice in this spot, he could raise with all the gut shots, right? This is really, it's not necessarily I'm raising top pair because I'm afraid of getting outdrawn. We're also raising top pair because in order to be balanced here, we have to raise with way more than just 2 pair and better, right? And even hands like this are going to need to fit in the check raising range if you're also check raising stuff like 8-5 and 5-2 suited and whatnot. So, seems like a fine spot to raise. He does get called by the 9s, which I think is perfectly fine. Continues betting turn. Notice here you don't need to bet too big, because if you bet too big in this spot, what's going to happen is your opponent's going to start folding out the worst hands. Whenever you are value betting a marginal made hand, you always want to make a point to keep your opponent in with worse stuff. And notice here if he blasted it, say he went all in, well now pocket 9s can pretty easily find a fold. Whereas whenever he bets smaller, now pocket nines is in a very bad spot. And notice your Apestyles is trying to get called by an underpair or a 6 or a 4, or maybe something like 7-5. So do not think you're trying to make draws fold. You're trying to extract value from worse hands. River's an 8, which is clearly terrible for Apestyles. Well, let's see what he does. I always get surprised by Apestyles. He goes for a small bet, right? Interesting. This seems a little bit thin to me. Now, I was perfectly fine with the pre-flop check raise, the flop, or the turn bet. This river bet seems super thin. Maybe this is a bet where you're betting expecting to get called by some 6s and perhaps some underpairs. Maybe he's thinking that if he bets, he's literally never going to get raised unless he has the worst hand, in which case he can easily fold. Also, fun enough, if you think about Apestyles' whole range, let's think about it real quick. He's check raising the flop, which means he has either a queen or better or a draw. How does this 5 and 7 run out line up for the draws? Well, it certainly nailed him pretty hard, right? A lot of the draws are going to have a 7. So this is a spot where you essentially all Apestyles' range is very, very strong, right? Because it's either top pair or better, or it's a draw that almost certainly came in. And this is a pretty fine spot to bet small. Whenever you look at your range and your whole range is just pretty good, and you have a lot of nuts in it, and right here I definitely think Apestyles does, it's perfectly fine to make a small bet like this. So pretty sweet play. I don't know if I would have done this, but it definitely makes logical sense, and is thinking about it more, it very easily could just be the right play to bet small here with your whole range. Now does imluckbox call. What a miserable spot to be in, huh? He's getting pretty good odds, and he does beat some bluffs. And you may say, what bluffs could there possibly be? Well, the heart draws, right? The problem is he has this 9 of hearts, which is pretty ugly because that blocks some of the hearts. But, you know, Apestyles does have a pretty laggy reputation, so I would not be shocked if he does get called here when he has the best hand some portion of the time. But imluckbox makes a fold that time. So before we continue moving forward, I wanted to talk to you about this giveaway I'm running. Last day to enter is May 26th, so make sure you get on this. I am giving away 1% of my entire World Series of Poker action. I think I'm playing something like $70,000 worth of buy-ins, give or take, depending on if I do well or not. Because if you do well in tournaments, it means you have to skip some of them because you make day 4, right? But we're going to the World Series of Poker. I actually leave on Sunday, and we're going to be playing a bunch of events. And I'm giving away 1% to one of you out there. Also, the winner of this giveaway will get 1 year of pokercoaching.com. So that's it. Do you owe me for 1% if you end up down? No, this is a pure free roll. You don't have to pay anything. I'm just giving this away because I appreciate all of you being here with me. So you can go sign up for that at pokercoaching.com/WSOP. So let me ask you a question. We just went over these 5 hands to help you do better at final tables. And remember, the World Series of Poker is coming up. And even if you're not going to the World Series, you may make a final table at some point, and you need to make sure you play them well because that is where the big money is won or lost. So these 5 hands explain how to keep the pot manageable. We discussed the button limp. We discussed understanding how ranges interact. We discussed applying immense pressure to the middle stacks, and we discussed how hand values change heads up. And essentially, I have gone through and made a special tournament bundle that I would like to share with all of you to help you master final table play. So all this came about because I was coaching this guy, David Einhorn, for the final table of the, well, actually I was coaching for the entire $1 million one-drop tournament. Every year he plays either the $1 million or the 100K event, and he hires a coach, and he hired me last year, and we spent a lot of time together. He said I was by far the most fundamentally sound player, and he did a very, very good job, just generally playing well, not doing anything ridiculous, and he built up a nice stack. As you see at one point, he's actually near the chip lead, but he had a very bad seat. He had Fedor Holtz and Justin Bonomo on his direct left. Not where you want to be. He ended up bubbling, which was a bit of a bummer. There's me, apparently on ESPN, typing on my phone to people. And it was a lot of fun. it was actually an interesting scenario because the day they ended up coming back with, I think, 7 players and 5 got in the money for the final day. And I talked to him for like 4 hours trying to figure out if he cared about winning the tournament or cared about cashing the tournament. And he gives away all of the cashes to charity anyway. So he didn't really care about the money so much. He was trying to win the bracelet, right? And so we realized there were no payouts. And his bust out hand certainly was an ICM mistake, but we were not playing with ICM concerns, which is always it was always a neat scenario. So anyway, we did tons of preparation and I decided to record some of it for you. So in this Ultimate Final Table bundle, I reviewed a high roller tournament where I was preparing David for the $1 million one drop, and we're going to be releasing this to you. So this final table included some people who I thought would potentially be in the tournament, including Scott Seaver, very, very great player. Sean Winter, who was on fire recently. John Jawanda, you all know him, he's a legend. And Talal, don't know how to say his name, Shakurshi, something like that. I know Sean Winter and Talal played the $1 million tournament. I'm not sure about Scott Seaver or John Jawanda, but anyway, I was trying to review final tables where he would know the people in the game, because that's really what we wanted to see, right? Like, I've played with Sean Winter a lot, and I know he's a bit loose and aggressive, so that kind of thing is very important. But it's important to also realize that your perception of someone, even if you played with them for a day or 2 days or 5 days, may be a little bit flawed, because perhaps they just think Jonathan Little is maybe too tight or too loose or whatever. And that's important to understand. So anyway, we reviewed this, and we're going to be releasing this to all of you who want it. Also, I've recently reviewed 3 high roller final tables. I was going through and trying to find the best players in the world to try to analyze their game and figure out why they do what they do. So some of the players who are featured in these 3 high roller final tables are Apestyles. We just saw him. I have personally learned a lot from him. We have Nicholas here, #1 in the world, and I go through and I name all of these people in the video. No need to name them all here, but in this video series, I go through and clearly label all these people. We have Dominic Nitsche, 18 million in winnings, Adrian Mateos, Nick Petrangelo, Talal, right? All these people have 10 million in earnings or more. And this ended up being 4+ hours of final table reviews, and we're not going through all the random hands where nothing happens. We're actually trying to dig deep on the very specific important hands where there is a lot to be learned, because I am trying to learn as well. A lot of people think that once you become a professional poker player, you can stop learning and just play poker all the time. But absolutely not. Absolutely not. You have to always study. And I've been studying as much as I possibly can over the last few months because I had a baby and I wanted to stay home and not make my wife leave me. So I've been home for the last few months studying very hard. And I'm releasing my study for the final tables to all of you. Also, I know that many of you do not play super high roller tournaments, and you need to know how to adjust to the very, very weak opponents who you may encounter in the smaller or medium buy-in events. So I reviewed a live final table with live cards face up like at a casino in a $300 rebuy tournament where the average stack was about 30 big blinds to start the final table. So it was relatively short stacked, but I know that that is a scenario that many players play in on a regular basis. And I reviewed that. That is 2+ hours long, and this will also be part of the Ultimate Final Table Bundle. Next, I reviewed 12 heads-up matches. So these matches feature some of the best players in the world where I am trying to study them and learn from them so that I can improve my game. So some of the players included here: Justin Bonomo versus Randy Liu, Olivier Bousquet versus Darren Elias, Bryn Kinney versus Jonathan Jaffe, and Sorel Mizzi versus Timothy Adams. All of these players listed are awesome. And I wanted to learn from them, and I'm, again, trying to help you all learn from them too. Also, in the Ultimate Final Table Bundle, I review the Card Player Poker Tour Final Table held at the Bicycle Casino. It was a $1,000 tournament with multiple day ones. People could buy in late. First place paid $175,000, and this was a long final table. It took over 6 hours for me to review. But that's good, because that's getting in there and working hard to like seeing the grindy part of the game, right? I know quite often when you watch poker on TV, they just show the highlights, but sometimes poker turns into this kind of grindy game where you sit there and grind it out. Next, one of my favorite series to make. It's how to make a final table with lots of chips. I reviewed a $530 online tournament that I played, the one that happens on PokerStars every week, where I made the final table as the chip leader. And I reviewed every single hand where I put a chip in the pot over the course of this entire tournament. And there were a mix of good players and weaker players. And this is pretty much like the type of tournament you will encounter in a $1,500 World Series event, or maybe a higher stakes local tournament. And I didn't win. I actually took, I think, 8th place because I had, I think, aces lose to queens right off the bat. Once we got to the final table, so that was a bummer. But you don't really get to control when you get unlucky. But anyway, I made the final table as a chip leader, and I wanted to show you how I did that. I consistently chipped up, picked up lots of pots, and that's how you do it. And finally, we have one more series that you'll be getting in the Ultimate Final Table Bundle. It is the Final Table Tips series, where I review some tips that will help you understand what actually matters when you're playing a final table. And these topics include like what actually determines your optimal strategy. We discuss prize payouts, stack distributions, final table adjustments, such as when you're the short stack, or the medium stack, or the big stack. And also adjustments like open limping and applying aggression and your opponent's tendencies. Some of you say that the open limping is a new concept. Well, I've been teaching it for a while. So it's funny how poker's a big game, right? You can listen and learn and pay attention a ton, and then there's still just little corner cases. So here's what you're going to get. You're going to get the one drop preparation series. You're going to get the Master High Roller Final Table series. You're going to get the Stones Live Final Table. You're going to get the Heads Up Secrets, the Card Player Poker Tour Final Table, how to make a final table with a lot of chips, and the final table tips. So we see total value here, $1,739. But I want to ask you, what if all this series did was to help you would avoid one mistake at a final table? What would that be worth? I mean, imagine instead of busting in 2nd place, you win. Or imagine instead of busting in 8th place, you take a 3rd place. So think about that, right? What is that worth? What if you can move up just one payout jump? And just think about this, right? Like what is the value of just moving up even a little bit? Even in a small stakes final table, it's probably worth an extra $100 or $200, right? What if we could just help you get one better result at a final table throughout the rest of your entire career? Only one, right? What's that worth? Well, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get all of these things, and we are going to give it to you for $99 because I want to make this work accessible to everyone. I understand that all of you out there do not have tons of money, and so we have this offer for you for $99. So you have pretty much 3 options. You can do nothing. That's what most people do, and if you do make a final table, show up and do your best. I would highly suggest you study before you go play. For those who don't know, I actually studied tons of poker material before I ever played poker for real money, and it was incredibly, incredibly beneficial. And then once I did finally transition to live tournaments, I was in such great shape because I had played tons of sit and goes, which are kind of like final tables. And I have lots and lots of experience in that, right? And getting lots of study in that particular format made it to where I do quite well whenever I make deep runs. And there's a whole lot of value in taking more 1st, 2nds, and 3rds than 4th, 5th, and 6th. The second options, well, you can hire me for private one-on-one coaching. I charge $500 per hour this. I actually turned down a decent amount of students because I'm swamped, but I'll consider if you want to do that. I have spent over $20,000 on private coaching throughout my career, and it has been worth every penny. I actually wish I spent 10 times as much because learning from people who have the experience is so much faster and so much easier than getting in the trenches and getting beaten up and losing half your bankroll and learning yourself. And if I can take some of my knowledge and implant it into your brain over the course of just a few hours of study, well, that is highly, highly beneficial, and it is an absolute value. And, option number 3 is to get this Ultimate Final Table Bundle for $99 and get access to over 25 hours of training designed to help you dominate final tables so that whenever you do make the final tables, you will be in great shape to actually win the tournament, which is the goal. So here it is. The Ultimate Final Table Bundle. Again, we have the one-drop presentation, or one-drop preparation session. We have the Master High Roller Final Tables. We have the Stones Live Final Table. We have the Heads Up Secrets. We have the Card Player Poker Tour Final Table. Also, how to make the final table with lots of chips. That's one of my favorites. And also the Final Table Tips series. So you can get all of that for $99. You can go to pokercoaching.com/finaltable. You can use coupon code FINAL to get that gigantic discount. So again, pokercoaching.com/finaltable. So now, if y'all have any questions, let me know and we will go ahead and get to it. Dean says making the top 3 is crucial. That is absolutely true. A huge number of people come to me essentially asking me the same question, saying, I seem to make a lot of almost deep runs, but I almost never win. What am I doing wrong? And the answer is, you're probably just playing way, way, way too tightly. And if you play too tightly, you're going to make a lot of 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th places, but you're almost never going to win. And whenever the best you can do is cash for 8th place, makes it pretty hard to win long term. How do we get the cards up on PokerStars? They have replays every once in a while. After big tournament series, they'll have replays available, and you can go and you can get those. There are also some YouTube channels that will post them for a little while before they get taken down. What's the most memorable hand in my career? I don't have a very good memory. I do remember four betting all in, or maybe it was 5 betting all in at the Mirage final table that I ended up winning. I had Jack 8 suited, and I got called by Ace 5 offsuit or Ace 4 offsuit. See, I don't remember the cards. And I remember losing and thinking, wow, that's pretty rough. And I had almost no chips left, but then I came back and I won. So that was a lot of fun. What format do these videos come in? These are digital downloads. You can download them. You can put them on any device that can play MP4s, I suppose that's what it is. Just standard video files. They'll play on any computer. They'll play on your iPad. They'll play on your phone. You can stream them from off the internet. We want to make it as convenient as we possibly can for all of you. David says, thank you for putting together such an amazing deal. You're very, very welcome. Look, I realize that most people out there don't have access to good poker mentors. And I was very fortunate early in my career to find good people on the internet who were also very like-minded, who wanted to devote their life to poker. And we did. But now I've taken tons of that knowledge, consolidated it for all of you so that now you can get it. Will you see me in the Big 50? You will not. Unfortunately, I am going to be playing, well, fortunately for me, I think, the World Poker Tour Tournament of Champions. It overlaps with the Big 50, and I'm going to play the World Poker Tour Tournament of Champions for sure. So I will not be in that, but I did send 5 people to go play. We gave away 5 $500 buy-ins to the Big 50, so good luck to those players. Also, we may be giving away some Colossus seats coming up in the near future, so make sure you pay attention for that. Am I playing the main event? Yes, yes, absolutely. Is this on pokercoaching.com? No. The only way you can get this right now is to go to pokercoaching.com/finaltable. Was that Queen 2 an example of a range merge? Not exactly sure the definition in that scenario, but I mean, essentially anytime you're betting with a very thin value hand, you are to some extent. That's more, I mean, the way I view that is more of a scenario where you're just betting everything because your range is so much better than your opponent's. Does this offer, or when does this offer expire? Go to the website. I am sure it is listed. If I was 21 years old today in the USA and with a dream of playing poker, would I stay in the US or move abroad to grind online? Oh, it depends on your scenario, right? I mean, if you have a good social life where you live and you have no one in Europe, it's probably a mistake to fly or to move away. Also depends on, can you make lots of money where you currently are in your current situation without investing or spending a lot of money to make that happen? I don't know, give more details. But anyway, if I was 21 and I lived in Las Vegas or Miami or something like that, I would very, very likely just stay there. But if I lived in the middle of nowhere where there was no poker, then yeah, I'm probably going to be moving. Let's see. Would we recommend to play more cash games or tournaments for a poker player who's been studying the game for a year? Well, study one specific game. Whatever game you've been studying, play that one, because cash games and tournaments are different. Do you open fold any hands heads up? Sure. If so, what percent do you fold? It depends on the opponent's strategy, but often not a whole lot. Do I like the Venetian tournament structures? I don't know the Venetian tournament structures. I don't do much playing at the Venetian because they're very, very anti-online poker there, and I am the opposite of anti-online poker. Aaron says, when limping buttons with hands like King 7, King 8, Queen 9, etc., does this hurt you by not giving the opportunity to win it outright with a raise? Sure, it does. The problem, though, Aaron, is that you don't win it outright with a raise anymore because people know to not fold pre-flop to a min raise. And as you start raising bigger and bigger and bigger, it makes it more and more difficult. Essentially, you're risking more and more chips to try to get a pre-flop fold. Like if you knew you could min raise and they would just fold a lot, sure, just min raise. That's what I was telling someone earlier. But you don't know that's going to happen, right? Because your opponents are good. Remember, these tips are for playing against strong players who play well, which presumes they're not just going to be really nitty and fold too often. The biggest hurdle for small stakes is the fact that small stakes get raked so hard. Yeah, I mean, the rake is very relevant, and if a game rakes you highly, then don't play. You don't have to play just because a game exists. Do we send out the poker coaching patches yet? We did. If you requested them, we have sent them out already. They should have arrived, most likely. Do we have any videos geared towards the senior tournament? I do not in particular, but well, let's see. You find they play different. Well, yeah, they play differently. They probably play, in general, just kind of worse, right? Because they lack the experience that a lot of the good online players have. And maybe they also aren't using solver tools and whatnot. But no, I don't have any videos on the seniors event because, well, I've never played the seniors event. It's important to realize I don't talk about anything I don't actually know. I did not say much to anyone for a very long time, and that's because I was not an expert. I am certainly not an expert in seniors tournaments because I've never played a seniors tournament in my life. So, unfortunately, I do not have any of that. Will this show up in the dashboard when you purchase it? It probably will be under, well, wherever your other purchases are, it'll show up there. You live 10 minutes from Stone Gambling Hall, and you have relatives in England, so you have options. Yeah, you do. Maybe you mix it up. Maybe you go to England for a month and play over there and see what happens, right? When we sit down at a table, how long does it take for you to start classifying players? I'm classifying players before any cards are dealt, by the way they look, the way they act, the way they talk, the way they stack their chips. What happens when you get good cards before you have an idea of how the players will play? Just play fundamentally sound. Now, you say play ABC. When someone says play ABC, that always gets me a little bit scared because if they're like, what does that mean? You're just playing super tight and straightforward? Don't play super tight and straightforward. You need to be playing fundamentally sound, which is what we discuss over at pokercoaching.com. Again, go there, get your free trial, go through the homework challenges, starting with the oldest and work your way forward. That will be very, very, very valuable for you. Does the Stones final table, am I commentating hand by hand for the whole table? Yes, I go through all of the hands, or the majority of the hands, and discuss all of the situations, and like if people are playing well or poorly, what they should be doing differently, et cetera, et cetera. Just like I did here with the hands today, except for it's live poker. Mark says, in your experience, most players consider ABC to mean 100% value betting and 0% bluffing. Well, yeah, that's not good poker. That's very, very bad poker. When should you be concerned maintaining your stacking in tournaments? You always should be concerned with it, but it should not be the overriding factor. When heads up on the button, you've heard it said that you always have enough equity to at least limp. Yeah, but you want to be making sure you're limping with a balanced range. I mean, the whole idea of I want to play weakly with my bad hands and strong with my good hands doesn't make a whole lot of sense if your opponents are competent. Because if your opponents are weak, if your opponents are like good, if your opponents are good thinking players, they're going to realize that your passive actions are just you being very, very weak, and they're going to crush you. How do you pick my weekly poker hand episodes from Stones? Can you request one? Yeah, request one. Support at pokercoaching.com. Link me to it. Make it easy for me to find it. If it's good, I'll review it for weekly poker hand. I have no problem with that. Do you play any different at Stones since it's low stakes and deep stacked much of the time? I mean, you always want to be playing in a manner that exploits whatever your opponents do incorrectly. So whatever that means, that's what you need to be doing. What days will I not be in Vegas during the World Series? I will not be there from June 6th through June 29th. If you have any technical issues pertaining to getting this bundle or anything else, please email support at pokercoaching.com. Chuck said he just got the bundle. Great. Is there a little coffee tomorrow? There absolutely is. I have a morning show Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern time where I discuss a specific topic, whatever you all request, and then I answer your questions. So check that out. It's on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. So check it out. Let's see. Do you feel like 2013 and 14 and 15 videos are still relevant? Sometimes. Depends on what they are, right? So I always make a point to go back and rewatch some of my older content because I've been doing this for 10 years or 15 years, making content for all of you and trying to help people improve themselves. But some of the stuff does get a little bit older, but it's still very, very relevant. If it's not relevant, I don't put it out. Some people will just put out anything. I make a point to put out high quality and high value content because I don't want to waste your time, right? Am I playing the closer tournament? I don't even know what the closer tournament is. I'm playing pretty much most of the $1,500 buy-in World Series events and higher. Do you have any videos on winner-take-all satellites? Yes, go to pokercoaching.com/WSOP bundle. There's a guide to single table satellites as part of that bundle. Let's see. You played the seniors tournament a few years ago. You got in by winning some satellites. They were paying the top 10%. You got to 28th place with pocket nines. You have folded or called. Well, Jack, I don't know of your scenario. Please list the hand. Go to jonathanlittlepoker.com/notes, type it out like that, and I will definitely discuss it. How do you remember so many detailed hand histories for your quizzes? Do I write them down? I absolutely do, Brad. I write down every hand that I play because my memory is awful. You can go to jonathanlittlepoker.com/notes to see how I do that. Which of my books should you buy first? David, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to play? What are you doing? Did I release this one-drop training video already? No. As far as I know, I haven't. Alexander, thanks for the kind words, saying that you're a fan and you enjoy my work. That's all you can do. If you're new to the game and you want to learn tournaments, check out Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Tournaments. If you're playing cash games and you're new, check out Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Cash Games. Both those books are relatively short, and they will give you good, actionable tips to beat the small stakes games relatively quickly. Is it better to check with bad ace-x offsuit hands in the big blinds or raise them? I typically do a lot of checking. But raising's fine if your opponents fold too often, right? Should amateurs ever show their cards? I don't do it, and most amateurs should not either. That said, people do whatever they want. Remember, people do not play gambling games for the same reason other people play gambling games. Some people just like to show their big bluffs, and some people like to show how disciplined they are and make big folds, right? I'm not looking for anyone's validation when I'm playing poker. I'm just trying to play the absolute best that I can. So, that's all your questions. We got through them. I want to thank all of you for being here with me today. If you did not, if you're not here live watching this, if you're watching a recording of this, make sure you get on my email list because we do lots and lots of free webinars with myself and the other coaches at pokercoaching.com. We've been having webinars with Alex Fitzgerald, Matt Affleck, Evan Jarvis, and we did one the other day with Fedor Holtz. So I'm trying to bring great content to all of you at a cheap price or a free price. And then if you like that, if you think we add value, maybe support us and you go to pokercoaching.com/final table and pick up the Ultimate Final Table Bundle. And I really cannot reiterate how important it is for you to make sure you know how to play the late game in tournaments. And the issue is that it's hard to get to the late game, and if you rely purely on experience, which is what many people do, you're going to find you have, like 10 deep runs in tournaments in your life? And if your sample size of final table experience is 10, whereas your opponents, they've been studying this for years, you're just going to get demolished. And I've tried to consolidate everything I know about final tables into this bundle for you to help you have the best chance of success at the World Series of Poker and at any final table you happen to make. So that's going to be it for today. Again, you can get the bundle at pokercoaching.com/final table. Good luck, have fun, enjoy yourselves, be nice to someone, and I will talk to you next time.